Afternoon. I'm Joseph Griffiths, and I'm grateful to be up here on the vBrownbag stage talking about vSphere 5.5 to 6.0 SSO architecture. And it's going to be a very quick talk. I'm going to go through a bunch of stuff very quickly, so stick with me, and if you have questions afterwards, I'll be happy to answer them. And there's some contact info for me if you have questions you'd like to ask me offline. So when it comes down to 5.5 to 6.0, we've got this huge tail that's happened over time. We've moved from an architecture where VMware was telling us to break out everything on vCenter to separate roles, to putting it back together, to breaking it out, to putting it back together. It seems like it's a story that we keep doing, and so every new release, we're going to have to break it out or put it back together. When it comes to 6.0 architecture, they're once again breaking it apart and putting it together. So in 5.1, they told you to break it apart. In 5.5, they told you to put it together. In 6, it's simple. They want you to break it apart into 2 separate roles, which are displayed here on the slide, or keep these roles together. That's it. They've done a bunch of things to tune the vCenter and allow these services to work together without conflicting with each other. In the past, they were always conflicting with each other, so you'd break them out to give them resource contentionless situations. So there's a whole bunch of services. Since we're talking about SSO today, or what will be known as Platform Services Controller in 6, or what is known as that, here's the 2 different roles we have. The essential thing that's important to understand about platform services for today's conversation is that it is a central location for identity management, and it is a central location for authentication as well as vSphere tags. It does a bunch of other things like licensing, so they can monitor your whole cluster at the same place, but that's outside of what we're talking about today. So the first thing you have to decide with a Platform Services Controller, or a PSC, is whether it should be embedded with your vCenter or separate. Because as I said, there's only 2 roles, Platform Services Controller and vCenter. So you can put them together, you can separate them. Now the choice of embedding really depends on how large of an environment you have. If you deploy a separate Platform Services Controller, you benefit from a couple different things. The first thing is you can connect Platform Services Controllers together and enable what they call Enhanced Link Mode, which allows you to see multiple vCenters by logging into one. It's a huge beneficial feature for manageability in your environment. The other thing is you can have tags and categories shared among multiple vCenters if you have a separate Platform Service Controller. If you have embedded, you can't really connect them. It's not a supported architecture. I will tell you that you can connect them. It just is not supported. They do work. And they support doing it as a transition model. And the permissions can be applied at the Platform Services Controller level and be pushed down into each vCenter. You can still apply permissions at vCenter level independently, but you can also do it at the global level. The global adds a lot of advantages. If you have one group that manages, now those administrators can be globally administrating all your vCenters that are joined to the same Platform Services Controller domain. It's a unique concept that comes up with Platform Services Controller, very much like SSO. There was a domain. We all called it vSphere Local. We didn't change that, most of us. And that particular name is there as well. The domain means everything in that authentication domain. Now inside of that, Platform Services Controllers has added sites, which allows you to delineate different sites. And that handles how they replicate between each other. And there's a lot more functionality and development coming in the next version of Platform Services Controller around replication control. So things within the same site replicate locally, things at remote sites replicate to one and then to many locally. So the question then comes up, Linux or Windows? As of vSphere 6, Linux is super supported, and it scales to massive scale that most infrastructures and most production environments can handle. The real question comes down to, what are you running today? If you're running Windows, you're going to keep running Windows, because there isn't a supported way to get off of Windows to the Linux PSC and the Linux vCenter. If you're running Linux, keep running Linux. Now here's a fun little tidbit. You can mix and match in 6. You can have a Linux vCenter appliance tied into a Windows PSC or a Linux PSC tied into a Windows appliance. There's no problem doing that. It works because it's all API calls. The only caveat to that is if you're going to use a high availability solution, you cannot tie the high availability, in other words, your load balancer, into a Linux and a Windows PSC. That doesn't work. That's not supported right now. I can't speak of whether it works. It does, but it's not supported, so don't do it yet. All right. And you don't want to mix your load balancer stuff there. So that gets me to Enhanced Link Mode, which I already mentioned a little bit. There's one thing about Enhanced Link Mode, besides the stuff that's on my slide, that is really, really critical. Enhanced Link Mode all it does is create a SAML token allowing you to log into additional vCenters. That token is passed to each vCenter. So when you log in to one vCenter that's enhanced link mode, as long as you have permissions in the other vCenters, you're logging into them as well. So if you have 4 vCenters and you log into one of them and you have permissions on all 4, you have just created 4 logins, 4 independent logins. This matters because there's 180 maximum number of web logins to vCenter at any given time. So effectively, if you have 4 vCenters and 180 people logging in, you just maxed out your connections on everything, all at the same time. So that's something to be aware of and a little bit of a challenge. There's some things on here that it talks about, replication between site. The one thing that's important about enhanced link mode is cross vCenter vMotion in 6. That's the ability to move a VM live without interrupting it from one vCenter to the other vCenter. Does require enhanced link mode. In other words, the same PSC. So as you think about that, think about what you want to do. If you want to be able to move VMs live from one place to the other, you have to have enhanced link mode enabled. Here's some scales and some limits from the 6.0 documentation. The main thing you need to be aware of is the maximum number of PSCs behind a load balancer is 4. I don't know why you'd want 4 of them behind there. They're very lightweight. They don't do a lot. And the maximum number of PSCs in a single domain, that vSphere local I was talking about earlier, is 8. So if you start scaling this out, and the maximum number of vCenters you can have is 10. So end result is, no matter what you do, if you want to have 10 vCenters behind the same authentication domain in the same enhanced link mode, you're going to have multiple vCenters pointing to the same PSCs or some sort of high availability solution. Because right now they don't scale. I have on good terms that these are all going to increase in the next version, but we're not there yet. So understand that this is a little bit of a limit today. All right, so I like to play with things. I like to break things. So for me, it was all about testing what's going to break in the various scenarios. So I created a very basic scenario that you see here. I've got 3 platform services controllers. I've got 3 vCenters. Each vCenter is a one-to-one relationship with their platform services controller. They talk to them independently, each one locally. And I wanted to see what would happen would fail. First thing I did was I logged into Site 1 and confirmed that I could see all the vCenters at Site 2 and 3. I can. And then I went ahead and powered off Platform Services Controller at Site 1. The good news is, at this point, my token has been passed to the other guys, and I'm authenticated. As long as I stay logged in, I can do everything against the local vCenter as well as the remote vCenters without any problem. The only caveat to that is I can't apply global permissions on the vCenter that is at Site 1 because that's a function of the local PSC. That makes sense. Now, same thing is true here. If I try to log into Site 1 while the PSC at Site 1 is down, I cannot log in because its local authentication is down. But if I log into Site 2, I can see vCenter 1 because I'm authenticated through. It's a weird caveat, but it works. So you can see the other vCenters when it's down. So that actually gives you some redundancy on your authentication. You're able to log into the other vCenters and do it. Now, in any of these scenarios, if the local vCenter is down, the local vCenter is down. You can hit the authentication page all you like. You're still not logging into that local vCenter. You can, though, log into the Site 1 PSC and see Site 2 and Site 3's vCenter. So that's the failure scenario, just so you understand what you're going with here and what you're going through. So here's one of the most common enterprise scenarios that I've seen. You can replace the word Windows 2012 with Linux appliance. It doesn't matter. As I said, you can mix and match them. You could do your PSCs all on Linux and then do your Windows vCenters if you want, if you're doing a greenfield. No way to migrate currently from the Windows to Linux that is supported. There is a fling. It does work, but it's not supported right now. Push that. Push it so it gets supported because we all want it, right? So here's a fairly simple thing. You could replace F5 load balancer with blank load balancer. This diagram just happens to have an F5 in it. And so for most common enterprise solutions, you're going to want to minimize the number of PSCs that you have to have at one site. Remember, there's a maximum of 4 behind a load balancer and a maximum of 8 total in the authentication domain. So if you take yourself a load balancer, you take 2 PSCs, you put them in different clusters. They don't have to be on the same cluster. They just have to be within range of each other. They replicate over IP, so they don't have to be on the same layer too. So put them in different clusters, put them in different location, in the same location, different clusters. Put the F5 in front of them, or your load balancer in front of them, and then point at the F5 side or your load balancer side and authenticate. And then point all your local vCenters at that site to that F5 for their authentication or that load balancer, and you've got yourself a great solution for high availability. At the remote site, you may not want to do that. You may not want to put your authentication on that. So what you do is you create another PSC at that site that has a one-on-one relationship with it. This could be a DR site, this could be a Robo, whatever you've got, right? That local Windows server, that local PSC, then enables authentication there and is in the same enhanced link mode with the rest of it, allows you to log into the others if it's down. So you can go to the backup site, and if vCenter's up the local site, you can get into that. It's a really great solution if you think about it. And they're all replicating across each other, sort of. And I say sort of because the truth is they replicate SAML tokens. They don't replicate authentication. They just go to local and say, hey, do you have that token? Is that person authenticated? Yes. It also allows you to have each PSC at different locations pointing at a different directory if you want to. Not recommended. Not recommended, but you can, okay? You want to probably use the same authentication source. All right, so here's the big question. If I want to go to something like this, do I do it now at 5.5 or do I do it at 6? Everyone I've talked to at VMware who's been working in this, and this is from the support side, do it now. Do it at 5.5. It is a bloodbath to try to introduce the load balancer and the PSC architecture later. It is really, really rough to do that. So do it now before you do the upgrade, and you'll be a lot better. But that means that you're probably going from either distributed architecture in 5.1 or some sort of smashed together architecture in 5.5 to a breakout. That means you got to break out the SSO, that's your first step, into its own box. Leave everything else together, because even if you separate the other things, or if you have them separated right now, the installer for 6 will just suck all those components in and insert them into the same box. So you don't have to do anything with the others, just make sure you get that SSO independently. Get that independent. If you want to use a load balancer, get that working with 5.5. I will warn you, PSC uses a bunch of different ports. The traditional SSO uses 7444. PSC uses 443, 8443, and a bunch of other ports. You can look it up. So you'll have to adjust your load balancer when you upgrade. There's another caveat here, and this is a disaster recovery caveat that I want to talk about. If you, the first thing you do is upgrade all your PSCs. Upgrade all your SSO to PSC, and after you do that, then start upgrading your vCenters. If you have a failure and you need to reconnect a vCenter to a PSC when it's 5.5, you can't do it if they're all PSCs. It's a big support problem. There's ways that support can work you through it, but you may want to leave one SSO at 5.5 as part of the domain on the side, just hanging there until you're done, and then just delete it. So I highly recommend just add another one to that domain and leave it on the side. Once you get everything upgraded, just delete it, get it out of the way, and you're done. That's just an emergency. If you have to point back to something to authenticate, that's the only way to do it, is to add it like that. So there's my contact info. I'll be available down here if you have questions. Thank you very much to vBrownbag for letting me on stage, and I appreciate it, and have a good day.